Hey everyone, how's it going? This is David Ruybalid.
Hey, and this is Zienka.
Hey, we're coming at you here on I Doubt It, and we're really excited about the next couple episodes. And today was sparked from a couple things that came across both our Facebook and our Twitter feed.
But yeah, we saw this this thing that was popping up from people that we follow, people that we know, and it's from a guy I respect him. I think he does awesome stuff.
He's a good author. I've appreciated some of his writing.
Brilliant guy. But it was from a pastor named Judah Smith. You may know him. But his church is coming out with this. How does he describe it? Phone in the palm. The phone in your palm of your hand is now the church in the palm of your hand. And so it's this app they've designed as a church to where, as they said, now you can be a part of our church, whether you're in Nashville, Texas, or Boston. And so like the idea is you can get on your phone, you can listen to a message, said something about virtual friends and getting to like meet and chat with the people that are part of this big kind of network on your phone. And, you know, this popped up for us because a lot of people were responding to it, and a lot of people either thought it was awesome and couldn't wait to download it, or were really upset about it. And so it spawned this idea that you and I were like, well, let's do a conversation on this, because that's a bold thing to call a church, you know, getting together on your phone. And so, you know, without this becoming a like Judah Smith bashing party, because there's other things that we've seen recently that you even shared an article with me a couple weeks ago that felt very similar to this idea of virtual church. And so I think we wanted to kind of, I guess, respond to that and think about it and contemplate it. Yeah.
I think in any time that we see kind of these trends or new things come out, there's a couple things we need to ask. What are the benefits to some of this stuff? What are some of the things that maybe haven't been thought about yet that could potentially be damaging? And the other thing with technology is it's moving so fast that it's like, what's the new thing that this is going to lead to that may or may not be helpful? One of the things that I want to talk about when it comes to technology, and that was kind of my realm in my last season of ministry a little bit, was I oversaw like social media and a lot of stuff with technology. And I remember going to a conference, and I'm not going to say the name. Most people who are listening to this podcast will know the name of the speaker. But he had a mantra that he landed on. He was the first speaker the first night. And really well-known church guy and a really well-known leadership guy, and he kept saying over and over, we need more, and we need more before, we need more, and we need more before, to kind of perpetuate this idea that the whole goal of us as leaders, and especially church leaders, is to get to more before anybody else. And I think that concept and that idea plays into us moving on to technology. I also think that me being Anglican, one of our mottos is that we prayerfully consider everything and take slow steps. And so that side of me is being like, whoa, like let's think about this for a minute.
I think it's an attempt to use a tool that we've been given, smartphones, and being connected to someone so quick, and being able to upload media, and it's great, useful technology. And like you said, it's the idea of pausing and thinking and being like, okay, we can use this stuff. I mean, you and I right now we're using a podcast, right?
Yeah, we're like over video on my phone. Right
yeah, we're over video. We're, who knows how many miles away from each other. And we're utilizing a piece of technology to encourage and, provoke thought to other believers. And it's a useful, good thing that we've been given through a podcast. But it can also be something that is misused, right? If you only take in your community word from scripture or what other people's thoughts is from a podcast, rather than being in front of an actual pastor who's thinking about his specific flock, and it can be an unfortunate replacement. And so I think with this new ideas of church, of hey, it can be just your phone in your hand. You can connect with all these people, and I think it's one of those where like, okay, this would be a great app, right? Like,
yeah.
there are tons of apps out there where you can listen to pastors who probably teach, way better than the pastor in your hometown.
Which could be a problem too.
Which could be a problem.
I mean, we're setting up expectations for our pastors.
Yeah.
To some
I'm
of
so
these,
guilty of it.
To some of these speakers that we can pull up on our phone.
Yeah. It can be a huge issue. But the beauty of being able to share resources or converse with someone from Nashville, from Boston, from Texas, there's something unique in that. But to me, it was the moment when this was being announced by Judah Smith, and it was like, oh, okay, I get it. And then it was like, yeah, this is our church plant.
Yeah.
Like in the virtual world. That was the moment I was like, okay, I don't know if you can't call it that. You can say your church has built an app, you've built a resource, but that's not a church plant.
Yeah. I'm like, it would be so fantastic if you're like, we have found an amazing tool to reach people who aren't walking in the doors of a church yet. Amen. Great. But it's like a red flag or a timeout sign hits the minute we call it, a church campus. I want to rewind just a little bit about kind of this trend. I in the early 2000s, I was part of one of the early experiments when it came to multi-site church with multi-site venue. And there were a few different pastors at the time that were playing with this idea. One of them was Craig Groeschel. And from what I understand, I don't know if this is fully accurate, but from what I understand, what wound up happening was they needed to play a video of him for service because he wasn't available. And what wound up happening was people gave their life to Jesus, and so they were like, "Man, this works. Let's continue pursuing this," which. That's fantastic when you're able to pull up a DVD and God works and does his thing. My fear is that we haven't ran this experiment out long enough to know like what happens with a personality-driven pastor when he leaves a church or gets fired from a church. We don't have enough stories of multi-site churches with some of these bigger pastors to really know, what the future holds. And kind of what we're doing is at times we're removing the pastoral presence of some of these communities and giving these pastors more of a title of a host. So they're the host, the site host or the site. And we're almost pulling the pastoral presence of a community and even the what would you say, the incarnational exegeting ability of a pastor to read a community, a city, and speak to it. We're in a sense removing that piece out. And so fast forward in this idea of this app where, you pull up a fantastic message, and I trust that the Holy Spirit could do its work. But how is that incarnational? How does that have grit to the city and the life that I live in? I'm in Modesto as opposed to Seattle,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I wonder too if this whole idea that we can create almost a virtual church comes from maybe a pendulum swing of the way we talk about church when we say like the church isn't a building, it's like God's people through the Spirit. And you're like, yeah, that's true. Like the church itself is not a physical building, but the church is physical. It is the like flesh and blood and, that stinky old person in the lobby and the crying kid next to you. And it's like, that's the church, it's the physicalness. And a bunch of the responses I saw to the announcement of this global virtual church thing was just, it was kind of snobby, tweets at it, but people kept being like, wow, this is like a Gnostic view of
Yeah,
church.
totally.
But if you don't know what that is, like, I mean, it's a big conversation, but like Gnosticism is one of the most early devastating heresies to the church that separated Jesus from the physical, that said he only appeared to be physical, and basically everything physical that we can touch is bad, and spirit and kind of the transcendent is good. I mean, that could be a podcast another day.
Yeah. Well, and some of those ideas still hang around, you know.
And those ideas hang around. You know, a lot of times when we think about when we think of the church and we make it almost so 9 feet above the ground, we forget that Jesus himself was physical and walked with physical people. I mean, he spent time with the stinky disciples and walked with them and was with them. And I think that's the hardship of these virtual churches is you can't replicate that. You can't go pick up that person from church, you know, who's hurting. You can't go bring them a meal. I guess you could like Venmo them money for a meal, but you know, like, you know, baptisms or communion, like I picture like a Postmate communion, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to sound like kind of crude for a minute, but have you ever seen the movie Time Cop?
No.
If not, I mean, don't go see it. It's not great. I think it's on Netflix. But it's going to sound crude for a minute, but this kind of resembles what we're talking about. Is these two characters in it have virtual sex with each other, and then they think to themselves like, why don't we just do it for real? And then they do it, and it blows their mind. Yeah. And I think to myself, like, that's kind of what we're doing with the church. Like, if you think about it, in a sense, that's kind of what we're doing with the church. And if we're not careful, we remove the real, tangible, physical nature, and we say it's okay to not have that. And you know, I think one of the things I think through, again, going back to the Anglican thing, as I think that sacraments are important. Because the moment the you know, mystical presence of the Holy Spirit or Christ in those moments happens when we meet with a physical element, whether it's baptism, whether it's bread, whether it's wine, and that grounds us to remind us, hey, this isn't some spiritual out there Gnostic idea. Like literally, Christ came in human flesh. And that he still wants to meet us in our current physical state. We don't have to hurry to die and go to heaven out there somewhere. Like literally, it's a physical thing, and it's precious moments. And you know, right now, Christianity Today, we were just talking about it. Is they were talking a little bit about this idea of a virtual church, and one of the things they were talking about are these digital age baptisms, like these virtual baptisms. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's what you said. Like, there's something about the physical. Like, He's created a physical world, and when He created it, you know, He said it was good. And I think that virtual baptism misses out on the purpose of the water. And I think that goes into a whole conversation of what's the purpose of baptism, because if people just try to make it just a symbol of your declaration of Jesus, it is that, but it is so much of that being in the water of death and exile and being brought out of it. In that physical, like with the people who have watched you grown up and have watched you come to church and seen you when you've been sad and seen the real you, and to actually be like, okay, he's the one being baptized today. You know, it has been passed down for forever that we baptize in the water. I think it's a step towards something.
I want to talk a little bit. Let's change gears a little bit, because there are often times in the New Testament where the place in which believers were baptized was a place in the public square. I mean, it is visually, everyone's going to see it. One of my concerns, and maybe it's just me, is what about the whole missional aspect of this? Like,
Yeah.
it's one thing to say like, hey, you could come on this app or this virtual church, and
Yeah.
yes, you can watch an awesome service and participate yourself by watching that, and yes, you can interact with other people, but it's still very individual focused. What the beauty of church and the beauty of corporate worship is that you have the outside in mind, and when you leave that moment, you leave to go change the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you aren't having these public moments of sacrament, or you don't have mission in mind, what is the outflow of these virtual church ideas?
Yeah. Well, I think you're hitting on it. I think that's one of the big key pieces it misses out on is that missional community aspect of being a part of somewhere that's real and physical in a city. And one thing I was thinking about too, as I was sitting down and reflecting on this today before we talked, was the idea of a virtual church based on a phone. Is it assumes like a financial status that you own, like a piece of that you own a smartphone. And as as much as we want to think everyone has one, not everyone has a smartphone, and not everyone has the ability for that type of communication and constant Wi-Fi. And so like right there, you've already just pushed out a group of people, and you've pushed out the group of people who Jesus cared about the most, those who are poor and can't afford, things that you and I just assume everyone might have.
And I also think about age status, kids and elderly demographic. They're most likely not going to have smartphones either.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you think about that, right? So if you think you don't have kids in there, you don't have the elderly in there, so then you just have this conglomeration of like millennials, like Gen X.
Yep.
And our community is just us talking in our own little echo chamber of what we know, with no wisdom from someone who's elderly and probably could maybe not be able to figure out how to even get on it or care to. And I think too, like that aspect of something that's virtual, trying to invite someone into that. It's just being like, hey, like join this same thing that every other space that you understand of communication is just like. So, hey, watch the sermon. Like it's a TED talk,
Yeah.
Here, interact with these relationships. Okay, that's Twitter. All we could be giving people with a church that's built on the virtual realm is the same like dull and soul draining and just inauthentic, expression of being a human, like the beauty of a church is that we're saying, hey, come to this place, there's going to be a meal. There's going to be people there who are going to greet you and love you. And that is way different than, hey, join this like other Twitter. Hey, watch this YouTube video by this guy with tight jeans. It's just the offer of actually experiencing Christ is going to be found in that with the real body instead of handing them a link to something.
Yeah. Well, what about, some of the virtual baptism situations that were talked about are people maybe with disabilities that are unable to make it to church service, or, I remember when I was at, Cornerstone, where we worked together, there was a lady who I remember she couldn't be turned on her back and dunked because she had a tumor for fear that she would have a seizure. And so, we had to pour water over her. And so what would you say in situations like that where this seems like a viable option for baptism?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly it. It's that viable plan B, plan C option, whereas this wants to move us into this is, the baptism. This is how we do it. But I think, and again, that goes back into this conversation of technology we're not curmudgeons who are like, back in my day,
Yeah.
It's when we can use that for something beautiful. Like, even if, like, I just had this idea, like, we're moving towards like holograms and like the idea that we could, like, for someone who physically couldn't be baptized, we could like project them being baptized and like physically being like, oh my gosh, it looked like I was baptized even though I couldn't. Like, that would be awesome, for one of those, just someone who can. But to move towards that being the expectant, that's when the technology becomes abused and misused, I would say.
Yeah. Right on. So how could we encourage people who are maybe hearing this and they're like, oh man, these guys are not a fan of, or at least we're skeptical of some of the practices of technology. What are maybe some encouraging words we can give to people in the ways in which they can use their phones for growing deeper in Christ and interacting with, the Bible or this, that, or the other?
I think the beauty of those things is when we see them as supplements, not the main thing. So for me, like, I listen to a ton of podcasts, but that is not the main, like, that is not where I get my main conversation with people, right? I don't get to talk to anyone during that podcast, or I don't know these guys personally who I'm listening to, unfortunately, sometimes. But to take those aspects of technology that we've been gifted, so whether it's being able to watch a sermon and whether it's listening to a podcast or interacting with people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever these virtual things that churches could be using, is using that as like the secondary and not making it the main thing, and just being aware of that amount of input of like other voices and how you project that onto your church. I do that all the time.
Yeah.
I go to church and I'm like, oh man, Tim Mackey's message would have been way better today. It's so easy to do that.
Or how would Tim Mackey say this?
Yeah. And it's so easy to do that, to where I have to like very, just be aware of it, just be constantly aware of that. And I think too, like, the encouragement in the physical church is like, it can be a refreshing thing. Like, I spend all day on a computer, constantly in front of it, constantly checking the engagement on these social media sites, engagement through video and podcasts. And where it can be helpful, it can be very draining and it can be exhausting, to where going to a physical church can be refreshing.
Yep.
And actually being with those people who I may assume something bad about them online, like I may have harsh feelings towards old white people and then being at church and be like, okay, wait. No, the lady I'm sitting next to is she's just a sweetheart. Like, and if I just saw her profile picture, I may throw all these projections on who she is, what she believes, who she voted for, what she thinks. But here she is sitting at church to me, and she's the nicest lady I've ever met.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of, like, okay, this is the reality. Like, just tearing off, it's like the Matrix idea, right? We're like in the tubes experiencing the projected world that we're given through everything we see, and to just add one more layer to that and call it church, that's just as deceptive. The beauty of the church is that's the moment we get ripped out of the tube and we're like, okay, this is the real world. This is the way God, has set up his kingdom and what he expects and what he hopes for. So. Yeah,
as a pastor and a worship leader, there's something precious when I know what family sits where, and I know what they're going through.
Yeah.
And I might have even had conflict with somebody in the last week or two. I mean, I'll tell you that, even being out here, there's some people who some weeks have not liked me. And when they come forward to receive communion with open hands, it's a moment of of grace and servitude and connectedness. In moments when I lead them in worship, and there's moments when I sing songs at times that I'm like, man, I really don't like this song, but it connects with these people. And there's times where like a couple of weeks ago, I preached hard, but I preached hard because I knew what their specific hangups were.
And that's not something you can always get from listening to a message.
Yeah.
You know, your pastor doesn't know your city. That pastor doesn't know what, your culture of your city,
Yeah, and it's beautiful. The other thing too, and especially I want to speak to some of the younger demographic that maybe really buys on to trends and stuff. I want to tell you, as a person who's kind of looked behind the curtain and worked behind the curtain, there's a lot of tricks when it comes to the production value of the videos that are showing up on a lot of these apps. And don't expect, if you're wanting to be a church leader, don't expect that's the minute you get your first internship or the minute you are right out of Bible school, don't expect that's what it's going to look like. Yeah, you're probably going to be vacuuming the floor and you're probably going to be doing a lot of stuff that you don't want to do, and you're not going to have the swinging lights and all that stuff. Because there's a lot of tricks in what we call post-production that allow us to give a solid presentation and production in a video that will come onto your phone or a video podcast.
Yeah. The beauty of the church is being able to see it in real life and be with those people and okay, this is the person that sits next to me, not the person that's online. One thing I would say, if this is so funny, I'm going to say this because we've just talked about other, just consuming other church messages. But there's this great sermon by a guy named Mickey Klint. He was a professor at Biola when I was there. He's a professor now, I think at Wheaton, maybe Moody. I can't remember. Anyways, he spoke at the church I was attending a few years ago. And it sounds so hypocritical to tell you to go watch a video, but the video is called "The Church is a Building." That's the name of the sermon. And it was like, it spoke a lot to this conversation and that idea of there's something beautiful about gathering together as believers. So, that would be my last
awesome.
thought of something to do.
Awesome. Maybe we'll include that in the notes. Hey, if maybe this conversation will continue on depending on what, trends happen and what happens over Twitter over the next couple of weeks or whatever. But more than anything, I just want to encourage you, if you don't have a home church, or even if you're like, man, church isn't my thing, if you don't have a home, like a group of people where you're attempting to seek after spiritual things, and if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're seeking after Jesus, if you don't have that, search for that. Us trying to figure this stuff out on our own with our phones is really not how we're meant to live. I think that's kind of my last deal to say is, and if you have any questions on that, if you're like, man, I live in a town or a city and I don't even know where to start, just write us. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. You can find Zach's blog and my blog. We'll have that in the notes. You can write us. I promise you we're active enough. We will respond to your messages because we want to help you be connected to people, experience human connectivity as you kind of journey on through life and trying to figure out faith. So thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thank you.